The Injustice movie is not what you expect and deviates from the game in many ways. Some changes are good while others are awful. Many characters from the game are completely absent, relegated to background characters, or they do one cool thing before disappearing, or they get killed off for no reason. Despite how negative this all sounds, my opinion on this movie may surprise you. This movie was leaked about a week ago, but I made sure to keep away from spoilers because I like to watch something in the best quality that I can. For anyone not aware, I am an animator who's worked in the industry, so I love films like this, and DC has always been killing it with the animated movies. When it comes to live action movies, Marvel's always the one ahead, but when it comes to animated films, I think DC's always been on top. But what about this movie, Injustice? I saw a lot of people online say they absolutely hated it. Before I even had a chance to watch it, they were telling me it was awful. In fact, many of them claimed this movie was worse than the Mortal Kombat film Battle of the Realms, which I didn't think was even possible. So when it comes to the Injustice film, I have to say it's not a terrible movie whatsoever. It does have some awful parts in it. However, at the same time, there are also some amazing moments. There's a stellar chess scene, for example, where characters are battling their morals at the same time. And there's also an amazing scene between the two Robins, things that I wish were in the game, that I wish were in the comics. It's that good of a moment. And as a result, when you account for the good and the bad, overall, this film comes out mostly good. I would happily watch this film with my dad or any other big DC fan. It's a fun what-if movie. However, like I mentioned, there are some bad moments that I will go into more detail with the spoiler review part of this video. Because this movie is based on a video game series made by NetherRealm, there is a lot of gore, and there's also a lot of death. And if used correctly, killing off prominent characters can be a great way to push the narrative and develop the characters, but sometimes in this film it is done purely for shock value, and that's it. And as a result, the death of these characters feels very hollow and extremely unnecessary, and for a lot of people it was aggravating. Because keep in mind, this movie does not adhere entirely to the games or the comics. It changes some things completely. Certain characters die that would never die in the games or the comics. In fact, one character dies off very early in the film and it feels just stupid, like completely awful and unnecessary. There was no reason to really do it. However, luckily for me, that was already spoiled by a thumbnail because someone just had to put it in the title about who died, so I already knew in advance and it didn't bother me that much. The death itself was still extremely stupid because this character, in the comics especially, is very, very tough to kill and they go out immediately. It doesn't make much sense. However, thankfully that's not a common occurrence in this film. A lot of the characters are as competent in this film as they would be in the comics or video games. However, unfortunately, some of them just never get to show up. Even if they were a big deal in the games, they just never show up in this movie. And that's especially true for any of the good versions of the characters or the original characters from the main DC timeline. They are pretty much all gone from this movie. And I honestly don't mind that because I feel like including the main characters did complicate things a bit too much, and I wanted to see this version of the heroes and villains figure things out and solve the issues on their own without help from the outside main characters. However, I can't say the same for other characters like Raven. I saw her in some of the screenshots and I was like, yo, I can't wait to see Raven, and then lo and behold, she does not say a single line of dialogue. So even though she does appear on screen and do something pretty cool, she never says anything, so she doesn't really have a character in this movie. And then some characters, like I mentioned, are completely gone, like Deathstroke. He's just not in this movie at all. Instead, we have Deadshot, who does show up in Injustice 2, so I kinda understand including him, but why not just use Deathstroke because he's only there in a fight scene anyway? And also, why is he in Arkham Asylum? That makes no sense. He's never gone to Arkham. He's not mentally inept. If anything, he'd be at Blackgate, which is just a prison in Arkham. He would not be in Arkham Asylum. That's for people who are mentally unwell. But you get the idea. There are plenty of characters in the games that will never show up in this movie. Even if they were in the first game, they might not even be on screen. Hawkgirl is one more really good example. She never shows up even once in this movie. I don't think she's even on screen. And then you have some background characters, meaning you see them on screen in the distance, but they never do anything, like Killer Frost, for example. She shows up, but she's just there for like 2 seconds. However, the upside is we get characters in this film that never showed up in the games, like Mirror Master and also Plastic Man, both of which are represented pretty well. They have some character and personality, especially Plastic Man did a very good job with him, but honestly, how could you not? He's just an amazing character. And then for one last gripe, sometimes the heroes act way out of character, like it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and that could be because the plot is a bit rushed, especially in the first act. Things move way too quickly, though I do want to say overall, the film has some pretty good pacing. I don't think it's too fast the entire time, but there certainly are some sections where they move too quickly, and that could be why the characters are acting out of character, because things are moving too quickly and we don't get enough time to understand why they're doing the things they choose to do. However, once again, I think this movie was good overall. I think it's a step in the right direction, but my opinion opinion is simply my own. I hated Battle of the Realms, and some people adored that film. And I absolutely adore Scorpion's Revenge, whereas many people think it's one of the worst films that's ever been made. So I suppose my overall summary would be this. If you're a longtime viewer of my channel, then chances are our tastes align, so I bet you would like this movie a good amount. And if you're a huge fan of the comics and the games, I bet you would also enjoy this film for the most part. Just know going in, it's not going to retell the same story. It has some changes here and there to keep you guessing. And once again, those changes are sometimes bad, but most of the time they're actually good. I enjoy a lot of the changes they made in this movie. There are some senseless deaths here and there that seem only for shock value, but even so, I'd say overall, the film is a good 8 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10 if you catch me on a bad day. It didn't blow my mind or anything, but it's also telling me a story that I've already experienced, and I still enjoyed it even with that aspect in mind. So now it's time for the part a lot of you want to see, which is the spoiler discussion. So let's go right into it. If you don't mind spoilers, well, here we go. Jimmy Olsen is killed immediately in this movie, and I can't recall if he dies in the comics or not. I think he probably does, but I'm not sure if he dies in the exact same manner. I don't really like how Joker is done in this movie. They try way too hard to make him seem scary at a surface level, which I feel like Joker never was. I feel like Joker, if you were just talking to him, would seem like a pretty normal guy. It's his actions that make him terrifying. But this movie tries to make him just generic evil villain in every possible way. His voice is creepy, his posture is creepy, his mannerisms are creepy. It feels like they're trying a bit too hard, kind of like Noob Saibot in Mortal Kombat 11. You know, they're trying way too hard to make him seem evil, and it comes off being kind of goofy as a result. You push way too hard in one way and loop back around to being silly. But then we have the death of Flash, which I thought was kind of ridiculous, but thankfully I already knew it was going to happen, so I wasn't that upset by it. The reality is Flash can move at super speed and also react at super speed, so the idea of him being killed by something like gas seems extremely unlikely, and then he's killed by like a saw. It's really weird. It's a very random death, and no one cares. That's the weird part. It seems like they added this death in later in the animation process because nobody even reacts to it. So I don't think this death was planned early on in the writing process. I think they added it later on. And I think the only reason that he dies at all is to show you, the viewer, that heroes are going to die in this movie so you understand the stakes. And if that's the idea, then I kind of understand. But the issue is we already saw Jimmy Olsen die, and he's a hero too in his own way. And we saw him die, so we know the stakes are pretty high. Not to mention a couple minutes later, we have the actual event that causes injustice, right? The death of Metropolis people, the death of Superman's wife and his unborn child. We see all of that. And as a result, killing off Flash was completely unnecessary and unneeded. I also want to mention that I don't really like Batman's attitude for most of this movie. He's way too stoic and a bit of a douche the entire film. He never comes off as likable, and I understand he's supposed to be dark and brooding, but even in the cartoon shows, he always came off as likable, and in this movie, he's not really likable at all. If you showed this movie to someone who didn't know a thing about Batman, they would come off hating him. Even if he is justified in his later actions, even in the early scenes where he's not supposed to be a jerk to people, he's still a jerk, and it's not charming at all. Now, thankfully, most characters are handled really well. Like Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, is done perfectly in this movie. Harley Quinn is a bit more childish than I think she should be, but it reflects how she is in the animated series, so they're probably going for that. So overall, a lot of the characters are handled really well, and I appreciate the writers for getting that much consistent. Superman makes sense for the most part until he snaps completely by the end, and what causes him to snap doesn't feel like it's what would actually cause him to go over the edge. I think they could have picked something a bit better than him just witnessing a party of people dressed like the Joker. Although I do appreciate the balls of the writers having them call him a fascist and having them be like worshiping the Joker. That's actually some pretty good commentary to what happens currently in modern day. You have some people who unironically worship people in history who were mass murderers. And why? Well, because apparently they represented some other concept like freedom or anarchy or some weird nonsense like that, despite being mass murderers. Oh, but they represent something better. BS, right? And we see that here in this movie. So once again, pretty ballsy of the writer there. However, even so, I don't think that would set off Superman in such a way. I think we needed something a bit more dramatic. Oh my god, I kind of forgot Mr. Terrific, huh? Didn't I? I mentioned the chess scene though. That scene is amazing. I find it a bit odd they mentioned smoking and not alcohol addiction, because I'm pretty sure alcohol addiction kills way more people. You have drunk driving, you have the alcohol itself killing people, fights while drunk, all that crazy stuff. And then I think fat, like, you know, carbohydrates and fast food restaurants, that probably kills even more people still. And they don't mention that, but I understand the idea and the core concept is there. And once again, it's done so well. I love how at first Clark Kent is the one checking Mr. Terrific because he's making good points, but then Mr. Terrific corners him in the debate of philosophy and morals, and as a result in the game itself of chess, he starts checking until finally checkmate, because yes, he is right. And I love that. I also like the idea that Mr. Terrific is the one who made like the portal to a different reality. That's really cool, and it's a good way to circumvent how the main characters like the good cyborg are not here to help do that. And then we have the Robins. Man, that scene was so cool. So we have Deadwing, which was in the comics too, and in this film he teams up with Damien to fight Ra's al Ghul, and I love that scene. The sad part is we don't get the amazing utopia underground that Ra's al Ghul makes in the comics. That's a really cool arc, and we don't get that here, but that's okay because it still makes sense what they're doing. Would I have loved to have the utopia and all that? Yeah, but the film would have been like 3 or 4 hours, which I would be willing to watch if it's done correctly, but I understand budget is a thing. I guess the final villain might be a letdown for some people because it's mostly Amazo, who's a machine that can copy superpowers. That's what he does, and he copies Superman when he's not looking, which means he's now Superman. The issue is he like is way better at it than Superman, which doesn't make much sense. Maybe he has like computer reaction times or something. What's funny to me is he just looks evil from the get-go, so the idea that Superman was okay with him doesn't make sense to me because the guy just looks evil. Like even laying down, turned off, he looks evil. I don't think Superman would be okay with using him. So I think the fact that he was involved at all is a bit of a misstep. I think Ra's al Ghul should have made him from the beginning, or maybe have like a fake robot and say that's the robot, but then he just uses Amazo instead and tricks Superman that way. I don't know, but the thing is Superman can also like hear your heartbeat, can't he, and tell if you're lying? I don't know. Maybe Ra's al Ghul's a good liar. That's entirely possible. I thought at one point they were going to put Lois Lane in the Lazarus Pit. I thought that's who was underneath the tarp, but I was completely wrong. But yeah, making Amazo the final villain might be a bit of a letdown for a lot of people. And then good Superman shows up, and it's clear that he's like the main timeline Superman. So not just the one you see in the Injustice games, but like the one you see in the DC comics and all that. He's the main Superman. And while he does get the upper hand at first, he inevitably ends up losing to evil Superman. He's not killed, thank God. I was going to be very mad if he was killed. And thankfully, the blow of him losing is softened a bit because he gets double comboed by a super reference from both the games. So it starts off as the super from Injustice 2, then it ends as the super from Injustice 1, and that was dope. If anything, we needed more of that. We needed more of the game moves used in this film. Please do that in future movies. And during the final fight, a lot of stuff doesn't add up. Like Batman's batarangs hurting Amazo is like nonsense because Superman can't even punch hard enough to hurt Amazo, and Superman can punch hard enough to like destroy entire buildings and tear through fighter jets like they're paper, but somehow batarangs are doing something to him. Come on, that's not a thing. But then again, it also happens with Superman versus Superman, where he hits him with like a telephone pole and that hurts him, despite him being hit by way more powerful things earlier on. It barely fazed him, but yeah, it's whatever. It's not very consistent, but it's always fun. Like visually, it's always fun. Once again, I don't think that good Superman would actually lose, but that could also be because I played the games where he wins so convincingly when he shows up. Instead, it's actually Lois Lane who talks down Superman, and it's not the main Lois Lane from DC, she's from a different timeline where Superman died. And thankfully, they don't just pair them up. That would have been kind of weird. Maybe to do that, it would have been a bit hard to understand or believe for the audience. It could have still worked, but it would have been really hard. Instead, she just talks him down and he turns himself in. Like the evil Superman sees like what he's fallen to, and he turns himself in. Very interesting. And he still gets to be a hero, but only when they need him. Again, I don't like Batman's line of you not getting off of that easy. I preferred it in the Injustice game when he says, "You have to kill me." And Batman goes, "No, not even you." Because Batman kills nobody. I like that. Very interesting. In the film, not as much. Again, he's kind of a douche the entire movie. So I can forgive it overall. And I'm sorry if this review is not angry and me ranting. That might be more entertaining. It may have gotten more views. I might be shooting myself in the foot by not faking anger. But I try my best to be genuine with all of you. And at the end of the day, I'm being happy even when I talk about this movie. So that should let you know that it's a good movie overall. I think Warner Brothers did a pretty good job. Is it better than the original Injustice story in the games? Maybe not. And it's definitely not better than the comics, but that's an unfair comparison because the comics have so many chapters to tell the story, whereas the film has a very limited amount of time. Alright, so it's actually the next day, which is why the lighting has changed a little bit, and I wanted to take this moment to critique all of the plot holes that I just realized about the movie. The death of Adam wouldn't actually free Superman because the kryptonite shard he was holding is still in there, unless I'm supposed to believe that radiation will also kill kryptonite. The fact that Dick Grayson died without hitting his neck on the rock, breaking his spine, implies that Robin directly killed him, which makes him a murderer of passion instead of it being an actual accident. The heroes would never ally with Harley Quinn. Yes, they're trying to keep her safe from Superman because they think he would kill her on the spot, but she is still responsible for killing millions of people and Lois Lane and the unborn child. She was not a victim or a hostage during any of that. She directly helped the Joker commit that crime, so she is 100% guilty. There is no way anybody would work with her. None of the characters in the Arkham Prison Break would be a problem for Superman, like even remotely. He could take them all out in a split second. I think we forget that he moves at the speed of sound and is strong enough to destroy asteroids with a single punch, but somehow Clayface is a threat. Poison Ivy's a threat. Come on, get out of here. That being said, I wish that Poison Ivy had gotten to kiss Wonder Woman and put her under her spell for my own obvious reasons. A lot of people might not consider this a plot hole, but I seriously doubt that Superman would ever directly ally with Ra's al Ghul. I understand that he saved his life, but I still doubt that Superman would ever directly team up with him. I just don't see it happening. Because keep in mind, this Superman is supposed to be identical to the Superman we know and love from the comics. The only difference is the horrible atrocity that Joker committed. So once again, I never see Superman teaming up with Ra's al Ghul ever. The only way that could ever happen is if Ra's al Ghul was the one pulling the strings and somebody else was allied with Superman instead in his place. And this next part is definitely not a plot hole, but having Lex Luthor never appear in the film is a very big sin. He played a major role in the comics, and then on top of that, he behaves entirely different from the Lex Luthor we know from the main timeline. At the end of the day, I think the reason that most people have a big issue with this film is because it does not stay true to the source material, and normally that would bother me a lot too. So please let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. How did you feel about the Injustice movie, and do you want me to review any other movies in the future? And also make sure to leave a like down below if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe and ring that bell, that way you never miss any future videos. Make sure to come back next time, and as always, stay underdogs.